let's get started.
Hey, good morning. So the first strategy that we want to talk about is mark and move, M and M. And this is the one that students, it's one of the easiest things to teach, but it's the hardest thing for students to replicate because they're just so used to skipping an answer. When they come to something that they don't know, they just skip it and move on. And you say, why did you skip it? And they'll say, because I didn't want to get it wrong. Well, guess what? On the ACT, if you skip it and leave it blank, you get it wrong. So what we teach students are proper ways to guess and make sure that you put an answer down and give yourself a chance. A 0% chance can become a 25% chance. And based on some of the strategies that we're going to show you today, it can become a 50-50 chance, which is really good. I mean, a lot of people would take their money to the casino if they had a 50-50 chance of winning. And that's what we want our students to do. Mark and move, give it a guess, and keep going. Another benefit of this strategy is it prevents students from obsessing and taking too much time when they are on items. And if they spend too much time on an item, then time starts ticking. Now the anxiety creeps in, and then they get to the next item, and it's like, whoa, was this the one before? So what we want to do is we want students to not spend too much time on items. If you don't know it, be able to recognize that. Guess it, put a mark on your paper, and move on. If you have time left, you can go back to the answers that you marked. If you don't have time, at least you put an answer. Mark and move.
Mark and move.
Now we get to the process of elimination, POE. And many of you are familiar with the process of elimination, but it is something that even as our founder, as Craig has said, he may not have known all of the right answers on the ACT, but he could find some wrong answers. And so in instruction and when your students are on the exam, we want to encourage them to look for answers that are clearly wrong. And when you find answers that are clearly wrong, usually there's one, maybe two, which is how we can get to the 50-50 answers that students can readily eliminate. So maybe Johnny does not know the correct answer, but he can identify that it sure can't be B. And I know there has to be a change. So I'm going to go out of these two. And now maybe some of my content knowledge sticks out a little bit more when I'm looking at two answers versus looking at four. So encourage students and show them when you're in class, discuss why answers are wrong when reviewing tests and quizzes. Discuss why answers are wrong rather than just going straight to the correct answer. Process of elimination. Now, in English, one of the things is to make one just little trick on the ACT that we've discovered after studying, dozens and dozens and dozens of ACTs. Good morning, Ms. Gehring. One of the things that we've discovered is that there are no solo commas in between a subject and the verb on the ACT. Now, you may have two commas, whether they're separating an aside or parenthetical elements, but you will not have an instance where there's a solo comma. So if you look on the screen, you see this item number 35 that says the objects themselves are apparently built from cubic planes of space. Well, they're being tested on the underlying portion, the objects themselves, and you see the comma separates the subject from the verb and the phrase, the action part of the sentence. And in that case, when a student knows that, then they will know that answer choice certainly needs a change.
And I'll jump in on this one. In English, especially, both on the SAT with the writing and language section and on the ACT, the English section, it really helps to sound things out. But when you're in a testing environment, students, and students can really benefit from hearing how things sound because some choices just sound off. Students often, you hear as much spoken English as you read or even more. And so one really helpful thing for some students is this little trick in a testing environment. You can cover your ear with your finger, and then you can whisper sub-audibly. And it's amazing how loud it sounds to you and how no one else can hear you. And so this is a game changer for some students because they can cover their ears, they can read aloud parts of the test, and it really helps. And you can use this strategy for reading too if you find yourself losing track of where you are. Sometimes kind of quietly reading aloud can help you refocus.
Objects in mirror. So the ACT will often will tell you will tell your students that figures aren't drawn to scale, when in actuality they usually are drawn to scale. So if you look at an item like number 44, and if your students are purely guessing, this is a guessing strategy. Obviously, there's a way to solve this that some of your students will recognize, but strategies are for your students when they hit a road bump or when they are when time is running short. So if you look at this item, if we're trying to solve for X and find the value of X, we see that X is roughly the size of the line 30, the line that's measured at 30. So your students can immediately eliminate some answer choices, process of elimination. We know it's not going to be F, it's not going to be 7, it's not that small, it's not going to be J, it's not going to be K. And we see that X is definitely significantly bigger than or longer than 15 in feet than line 15. So the most realistic guess for a student would be 32.5 because it's close. And even though it's not the same and it may even appear a little smaller, it's close enough for your students to guess. And in this case, they'd be guessing correctly.
Ding, 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 ding. And I'll jump on popularity contest. So take the same problem. You know, one thing to keep in mind is that the ACT and SAT test writers, they create trap answers. They create answers that look very similar to the correct answer. And so some students get discouraged by this because they feel like the test writers are trying to trick them, but they can use this to their advantage. And the way they use this to their advantage is with the popularity contest. So if a student has to completely guess, blindly guess on the math test, and this works in other tests as well, like the science test to some degree, they should choose an answer choice that looks similar to other answer choices. They should choose the most popular choice, right? So it's the kid that's wearing the same clothes as all the other kids, right? So in this choice, let's say I didn't even use objects in mirror, there are two choices that look very similar, choices G and choices H. They both have that 0.5 at the end. They both have, they have 2 digits to the left of the decimal. Those look very similar. You know, J and K look kind of similar, but one's 2 digits, one's 3 digits. G and H look the closest match up. They're the most popular choices. And so if a student just did that, they would be to a 50-50 guess being able to get to the right answer.
Now, for skim and scan, the reading test can be one of the most challenging tests in terms of time. And so on the ACT and on the SAT, one thing we teach students is to not get bogged down reading every word, every line. You want to skim. You want your students to skim the passage, getting a good orientation for where things are located in the passage and a good orientation of the narrative arc of the passage. And so as they do that, as they skim the passage and get oriented with where, and remember, where is more important than who, what, when, and why, because if they can know where something is, then when they get a question about who, they can go back to the section where they saw this person or this thing. In this case, for number 7, the enchanted castles. The narrator mentions enchanted castles. So because your students have skimmed the passage, now when it's time to go back and find something specific, we teach them to scan now, which is what we call Googling, right? It's like a word search. Now you go and okay, enchanted castles, it was on this side of the page about midway down, maybe this 3rd paragraph. And then they are able to take their finger and scan for those topics and be able to answer the question from there.
Now, another thing to think about, and it's really important in the SAT, but also really relevant on the ACT too, is the concept of vocabulary substitution. There are tons of vocabulary questions on the ACT and SAT, but the thing to emphasize to students is they're not real vocabulary questions. Usually all 4 answer choices, or 3 out of the 4 answer choices, are going to be correct definitions. Look at question 39. It says, examine most nearly means. Question, check, quiz, and explore are all synonyms for examine. And so really, this isn't about examine at all. What really this question is asking about is which of these 4 choices is the best substitution, can be plugged into that sentence. And when your students get this, it's a total game changer for this question type, because they're not racking their brains anymore about, oh, I don't know what that means. What's this nuance? They're just looking at the sentence that's being talked about, and they're plugging in the correct, the choices until they find the one that works best. Another technique you can use that helps students with vocabulary, and this applies to the science test, it applies to the graphs in the SAT, and it's called connect the dots. When a student sees a confusing term, like for example, in this question, DDS, I didn't even show you the whole question because I don't want you to worry about the whole question, right? But the DDS, right? Like, what is that? Who knows? Unless you are a quantum physicist, you are not instantly like, yes, I get it, cool, right? And so our students are going to just be sad, right? And what they should be doing though is they should be getting excited because unusual words and phrases are clues that let you connect the dots to where they appear in the passage, right? So now I can see, okay, where is D and S and like italicized showing up? It's like, ah, now I see in table 1, this is where I need to be looking. You don't need to know what it means to still be able to connect the dots. And you'd be amazed how students can get past a lot of scientific terminology if they just use those words, those letters as signs and those words as signs. Just like on a street sign, like you don't know what the street sign means, but you like where this place is that they're talking about, but you live on that street, right? So same kind of concept. And then last but not least, skeptics win. And this is a very simple point, is that on the SAT math test, there are a lot of statistical questions. That's a new thing on the test. On the ACT, in the science test, there's a lot of statistical questions. And you want to choose the claim. If students have no idea and they need to guess, they should choose the claim that's the easiest to prove. They should choose the least sweeping claim, right? Like, so for example, this definite statement of in choice A that the seniors would have won, that's bad because that's way too sweeping. And I'm a skeptic, I'm a scientist. I don't believe anything unless you prove it 20 times, right? So choice B is a weaker statement. It's easier for a skeptic to accept. That's a better guess. So there you go. Somehow we got through 10 tips in just a little over 10 minutes. Usually we spend a little more time than that on each, you know, so you can see me and Jay struggling here because we're used to like 5 to 10 minutes of strategy. Here's an example, all that, but we got through it. And so now it's over to you. So we want to hear from you. What questions do you have? What strategies have you seen that have worked for your students? And yeah, I'd just love to get your take at this point until we run out of time. Oh, I don't need to be sharing my screen anymore, do I? There we go. So yeah, so please raise your hand if you want to. We'd love to hear your voice, or fire off in the chat or in the Q&A. Any questions you have? Any thoughts?
Craig, when I'm doing interviews, I always tell the candidates, questions are good. Questions are good.
Questions are lovely.
Thank you, Tanya. You're welcome.
So I will say this. Okay, great question. So Frederica asked, explain a little more about connect the dots. Okay, so there's an exercise that we actually do with students that we call connect the dots that helps build this skill. And the way it works, because you want students to realize that scientific terminology as it appears in the ACT science test and terminology as it appears in various sections of the SAT are labels, right? They don't necessarily, the student doesn't have to know exactly what they mean to use them correctly. And so what you do is you say, okay, we're going to read this passage and this question, and then anytime you see a term in the question that is mentioned also in the passage, I want you to draw a line to connect the term to where it appears in the passage. And you're not going to do this on the test, right? Because then you won't even be able to read your paper. There's so many connections. But you actually get them to draw the connections. And what they do after they do this with a few passages, they realize that just about every time there's a confusing term, there's a connection to the passage, to the figures, to the charts that help them answer the question. And that's the point where the light bulb goes off and they say, hey, I don't need to be daunted by these terms. I just need to use them as labels. I just need them to use the road signs. So great question, Frederica. I hope that helps. We have a video. So if you email me If you'd like to see a more detailed explanation of connect the dots, I can send you a video that kind of walks through all that. Jay, you want to take Lori's?
Yeah, so Laurie says, what about students who read and claim they didn't really understand what they were reading? How can they learn to critically read? Well, one thing is reading, right? So exposing students to reading as much as possible, much long form things or things that we always suggest they start off with magazines that they're interested in, but reading articles, Popular Mechanics, National Geographic. And then, now this is outside of class, but then explaining what you read to someone or recapping what you read to yourself helps students to retrieve that and to be able to communicate and demonstrate understanding of what they've learned. Now, on the test, as it relates to the test, we also want to help them build confidence that, hey, you don't have to understand or memorize every detail that happened in this passage, but you can identify who, what, when, and where, right? Who's this about? Where things are located in the passage, being able to understand kind of the arc. Okay, this passage starts off a certain way. This is the main character. This happens to that character. This is how it plays out. So they don't have to really, fully synthesize the entire passage. So that's the way you want to encourage them when it comes specifically to the test, is being able to break those reading sections into chunks, and then be able to, when they read the question, know where that information is found. But ideally, you certainly want to help them strengthen their reading skills by providing reading time and content, and encouraging them to read and retrieve what they read, either through conversation or through personal reflection or even through writing.
Great point, Jay. And I'll add to that too, that one hack that you can share with your students, and this does not work for the first passage in reading on either the ACT or the SAT, but everything but the first passage is nonfiction. And so one thing that you can really, a cheat you can share with some students who have very little time to prep, is that nonfiction passages have this structure where the first and last sentences of the paragraphs are the most important, and the first and last paragraphs are the most important in the passage. And so some students really benefit from telling them, hey, slow down when you're in the first and last paragraph, slow down on the first and last sentence of the paragraphs, focus on those, and sometimes they can get a lot more benefit. They can learn a lot more. It's easier to critically read when they're going a little slower. Kayleen asks, what advice would you give students on how to handle anxiety on the tests? I'll give you a little tidbit. I bet Jay has more. One thing that I think really helps students is running them through mini tests. The timed nature of the test really stresses them out. If you give them little tiny chunks of an ACT or SAT test and give them a strict time limit for it, it lets them get all of their game day anxiety out in a practice setting, and then it's a lot easier for them to manage the time. You want to add to that, Jay?
Yeah, because remember, I think one of the items that I did or that I showed you helped reduce anxiety, and that was the mark and move. So one of the things to do to help students reduce their anxiety is for them to actually get practice, right? To get practice under timed conditions. Many students, their first time taking a time test is when it counts. And so one of the things we do in our SAT Mastery and our ACT Mastery program, we build in timed practice sets. They're not quizzes, they're practice sets, so that the students you have 2 minutes to answer these three items. And so the students are getting used to that, and it's part of our regular flow, so that when they get on an actual time test, they understand the pacing, and they're not as anxious. And then when you couple that with some of the other strategies like mark and move, then now students are really reducing the factors that lead to anxiety, which is, the biggest one being time. So timing tests, we encourage you, you don't have to speed through the content. We can spend time in content, but we don't compromise on the time portion of it. So in class, we're timing our tests. So because the time seems to be the biggest pressure that a lot of students face when they take the standardized test. One of the very first things you can do to help reduce that anxiety is to teach students how to either answer, how to find an answer correctly, or be able to make a quick decision on whether they know something or not, and be able to move on within the allotted time per item.
And I love your mention of mark and move, Jay. It's like some students just can't handle guessing or skipping, and like so they freak out about an item. And so your mark and move in and of itself, like it's the key to doing well on time. But it also, you'll find that, you know, if you can just get students, like, it's okay to miss one. It's okay to guess. It's totally fine. I have a question here for us that says, will you post your email again, please? Absolutely. Here's our contact information. Please feel free to reach out to either of us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you however we can. Jay, was there something else?
Yeah, that was just one other thing as it relates to the anxiety, and one of the things that we teach students, obviously, is if you is the mark and move strategy, because students, I'm sorry, I'm speeding a little. It's like I'm under the clock, Craig. It's like 1 minute. But
we have anxiety about our time limit.
Right. See how easy anxiety flows? But when your students know their score goals, right? So that's another thing that's important, when they understand how many questions. So when a student knows that in math, to get a 22 on math, they need 36 out of 60 items right. Okay, they need 36 out of 60. We tell them to shoot for 5 more than that. So let's say a student knows I need 41 questions correct to get my 22. Then that means there are 19 items that I can mark and move on. And so when students are pacing through the test and they're marking and moving and they know they're not close to 19, that helps to keep that anxiety down, versus going into the test thinking, I need to make a 22, but I don't know what it's going to take to get there. And now I'm stuck on number 12 and it's been over a minute. And now I go to number 13 and I don't know that one either. And that's another way for that anxiety to creep in. So to circle back, having clear goals that a student is working to, and then helping them plot a course to those goals is another key way to reduce that anxiety.
Absolutely. Great questions. Thank y'all so much for chiming in there. And at this point, we're wrapped. So please join us for next week. We'll be sending you an email that gives you the recording for this, as well as an opportunity to subscribe to the remaining 10 at 10s. We got 10 of them, surprise, surprise. And so next Tuesday at 10 o'clock will be the next one. Hope you enjoyed this format, and looking forward to chatting with you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.